And I'm muted. I'm muted, so all of that was for naught. I should be. I don't see. Okay. So again, good afternoon. My name is. It's on. Okay, so now I'm good? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Fossilitz. I serve as the board administrator for the Texas State Board of Examiners of Marriage and Family Therapists. We'll start with a roll call. Dr. Merchant. Present. Pastor Skoma is not here. Dr. Barti.
Present.
Dr. Elder.
Present.
Ms. Azell.
Present.
Mr. Parrish.
Present.
Ms. Rainier.
Here.
Ms. Nicole.
Richard. Present.
And Ms. Smith is not attending. So we have a quorum, and with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Merchant, the chair.
Okay, I hereby call this meeting to order at 1:07 p.m. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for our Zoom attendees for also being present. It is so good to have us all back under one roof. Although the board started meeting face-to-face again, I think maybe 2 meetings ago, maybe just 2 meetings ago. This is our first time to also have staff. And so it just feels really good to have us all together in 3D. It's wonderful. So I also want to welcome, we have 3 new members to the board. So we have Miss Elvira Reyna, who's joining us. We also have Barbie Ezel, who's also one of our new public members. And then we have Nicole Richardson, who is our newest professional member. So, okay, let's go ahead and get going. So agenda item number 2 is approval of our minutes from the September 29th video conference board meetings.
I move to approve.
Okay, do I have a second? Is there any discussion? Okay, all those
So,
in favor.
I'm sorry, I received some comments from Dr. Elder. Do you approve as is, or are you asking for those changes?
Oh, okay. So I thought that we could just make technical corrections without bringing them up to the board because they were just kind of typos. But if you want, I can go through those during a discussion and we can all approve. I'm asking that those changes be considered.
Well, certainly the agenda item 14, the 9th line down, AMFTB should have been AMFTRB. That one I think I can make.
Sure.
The other one you noted was is agenda item 19,
Yes.
and the public commenter, I'm reading from the minutes now, had sort of a difficult sentence, however, allowing persons who were never this was about the school allowing chaplains
Oh, yes.
to serve. She said, however, allowing persons who were never chaplains before into schools will likely lead to small clients and their families far too soon in their young lives. That didn't make sense, is what
Yes.
feedback I got from Dr. Elder. Well, I went back and listened to the YouTube video.
Okay.
And what she said was, will lead to small children and their families in need of therapy far too soon in their young lives, or small clients and their families far too soon in their young lives. I hesitate, it's not a transcript I'm trying to summarize, but it still needs to have some clarity. But I don't want to put words in Ms. Martin's mouth after the fact. So since I do have those words on the YouTube video, if the board's okay with that correction, I feel confident with that.
I
Agreed.
agree. Do you want to make a motion to make those corrections?
Do you want to talk about the very last one
And
real
then
quick?
the last
Okay.
one was item 20. The board considered item 20, announcements and comments requiring board action. And Dr. Elder opined that it would be clearer if it said no items were discussed or that kind of thing.
Mhm.
However, some items were discussed,
Oh,
but I don't know if they belong in minutes. So what I wrote down as my notes from listening to the video again was Dr. Merchant called for announcements. There was silence for a moment. Mr. Francis thanked the board members for their support and their camaraderie during his terms. And then Dr. Merchant expressed appreciation for Mr. Francis and Chaplain Stoglen, and then Chaplain Stoglen noted it was an honor to serve, et cetera. So all of those are nice things, but I'm not sure if they belong in the minutes. So I wanted to ask your opinion on that.
I agree that those don't necessarily need to be in the minutes.
But I felt conflicted with saying no comments were offered or no items were offered, because there was, if I were using the minutes to decide whether I wanted to listen to the video,
Yeah.
there is more there on the video, and I didn't want to indicate there's nothing there, there's no there there.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to leave that as is,
makes complete sense.
if that works for the board members.
Mhm.
Okay,
So
So-
then I amend my motion to include changing item 19 as Mrs. Basel has discussed, and amending the earlier number 14, changing AMFTB to AMFTRB.
Was there a second? Okay, Russ seconds. Any further discussion? Okay, all those who approve, just raise your hand. And that is unanimous.
thank you.
Okay, let's move on to agenda item number 2. Or number 3. Discussion and possible action to re-elect or replace professional delegates to BHEC. So currently Janine Smith has been serving in that role for the last 2 years. Janine is willing to be nominated. So I would like to nominate Janine Smith to continue to fulfill that role at BHEC.
Second.
Can you do that, or does
Oh,
somebody
can I do
else have
that?
to? I don't know if the chair can make a motion.
Oftentimes the chair asks for it, but I don't know if
Ask-
the chair couldn't make a motion herself. so-
I'm fine with it, I just didn't wanna,
Yeah, no.
I didn't want Robert to be rolling over in his grave, you know, like, no.
I think, if I remember correctly, one of the board's rules used to say it adopted Robert's rules and we repealed that part. So we don't actually have to follow Robert's
Okay.
rules. So
I'd like to make a motion that we let the chair make any motion she wants. But no,
Would somebody like to nominate, would somebody like to nominate anybody for the BHEC, the professional member?
other than
I mean,
Ms. Smith,
yeah, well, you can nominate somebody else if you want.
why?
I have no idea. That would be up to you.
No, I think we're happy if she's happy. So,
I second your motion.
Yes.
to nominate Ms.
Is there
Smith.
any further discussion? Okay, you look like you gotta say something.
No,
Okay, okay, then all those in favor of appointing Ms. Smith back to the BHEC board, raise your hand. That is unanimous. Okay, we also then need to replace Reverend Skoma, Dr. Reverend Skoma, who has been serving on the BHEC board. He has moved to San Francisco, and so we are all very sad at his departure. It was somewhat sudden, but he is out in the world, like he's fulfilling his mission. And so I feel like, I don't know, I wish him the best because I know that he is doing wonderful things there in California. Anyway, so we need to replace his position for the professional member.
The public member.
I'm sorry, the public member. So it is okay for me to nominate someone. Is that what we decided? Okay, I would like to nominate Mr. Parrish to be our professional member, or sorry, our public member. He is our longest serving public member at this point, and so I feel like he would just be good for the position. So do I have a,
I'll make a motion
do
that
I make a
we
motion?
appoint him thusly.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? you accept our nomination?
I do.
Okay, all those in favor of appointing, Mr. Parrish to the VPEC board, raise your hand. Okay, that is unanimous.
The next meeting for the council is February 20th.
And those are all via Zoom, correct?
I have no idea.
Okay. Are those via Zoom?
There's usually options to join by Zoom, but I think they are doing some in person. So there'll always be a hybrid option. So
Okay,
you can show up in person or you can attend by Zoom, I think.
okay, thank you. Okay, agenda item number 6, board review and possible action regarding appeals of applications for licensure
Oh,
denials.
you missed 5.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So Reverend Dr. Scolma also served as the vice chair,
Oh, yes, that is correct.
which usually gets revoted on at a different time, but because
Yes.
he's not able to finish his term.
Correct. Yes. Well, then back to agenda item number 5. I would like to nominate Jody Elder, Dr. Elder, to be our vice chair.
I will second that, if that's a motion.
Okay, do you
I
accept?
accept.
Okay,
I'm honored.
is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of appointing Dr. Elder as our vice
I
chair?
vote for myself.
That is unanimous. Okay, sorry, now to agenda item number 6, board review and possible action regarding appeals for application and licensure denials. There are none. Agenda item number 7, board review and possible action regarding agreed orders. None, right?
None to be executed by
Yeah.
the board.
None to be executed by the board, okay.
Correct.
8, board review and possible action regarding contested cases from SOA. There are none of those as well. Agenda item number 9 is report of agreed orders executed by the council's executive director. I think
Those are in your meeting packet.
Mhm.
If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them, or Attorney Patrick or Attorney Brian are here for that.
Are there any questions or discussion over agenda item number 9?
There was a case that was decided, I can pull it up, if the names matter. The, am I allowed to say his name?
Yeah, the order is public now, so
Okay.
you can, it's probably easiest to just go, is it the 22 or the 23 case, I guess, because usually the complaint number at the top
22.
is the 22 case, okay, yeah.
So the findings of fact, there's 5, all of which are pretty serious and severe. I had some questions about the remediation plan. I was surprised, given the findings of fact, that this person's license was not revoked.
Yeah.
Can we address that? I mean, or
I don't know, so part of what the difficulty is so there's section 507, 205 makes all the complaint files confidential. And so the order itself is a public document. Once we discipline the licensee, that's out on the website. That's fine to talk about, and it's in the board's materials and the public's materials. The specific details of a particular case, we can certainly go into with board members. It's some of the details, though, are things that if it didn't go to a SOA hearing, it wasn't there wasn't a public record created of it. And so a lot of times we can talk about in general terms, such as there were certain factors that a lot of these will usually go to an IFC conference, an informal settlement conference. And so the board members will look at sort of some of the mitigating circumstances that might lead to a lesser severe sanction. If you'd like to look at, once the file is closed, a board member can look at the case file and actually see some of those things. We just can't necessarily go into very specifics of those in a public meeting because it's then making that confidential information public. So, and in a general way, we could try to answer the question. I don't know if that'll fully satisfy your question though.
Well, I think especially since the court filing is a matter of public record, I think most clinicians that would read the findings of fact be similarly surprised and confused as to why this person's license wasn't, and I'm not trying to dig where I'm not allowed to, But I think most people reading this would be confused as to why this person's license wasn't revoked.
Well, I mean, just in general, I'm with you. I feel you on what and how is this person still allowed to practice?
Right.
The thought was, and this is kind of a trend nationally, when a license is revoked, that person, we have seen a tendency for clinicians to continue practicing, but change their name to, I'm a life coach, and they charge the exact same thing. They just change their title on their website. And then they're no longer under our jurisdiction and we can no longer manage their ethical practice. But if we do something like this with a significant probated suspension, significant practice monitoring, now we have eyes on and can make sure that person is ethical moving forward. And I think that was part of the reasoning behind this and similar conclusions. Yeah, but I agree with you.
I can relay as well that the ethics committee met on January 9th and they review or do an audit of the cases, and this was one of them that they looked at. I don't know if that, but the process has more eyes on it than staff.
Oh, yeah, I certainly wasn't suggesting that somebody failed to do their job. To me, it was more, given the findings of fact, some of that felt pretty black and white to me. And so, and my understanding was that certain of those 5 items, some of those unto themselves would have been a reason to revoke someone's license. And when you add them all together, I think that was particularly startling for me. I hear what you're saying, yes.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is what might be helpful for future orders, because since this is done, we can't really amend it, but for future orders, it might be better if, so, because we do have a standard schedule of sanctions and certain things, what would be like automatic revocation, automatic suspension. It might be helpful if we have certain things that deviate that are serious like this, to list maybe some of the mitigating circumstances as to why this is not, when you read it, you see some of those
Yes.
terms, you're like, well, why isn't this, an automatic? So I think that's maybe that's what I'm hearing is maybe the takeaway is for the future, maybe we should do a better job of putting some of those sort of mitigating circumstances
I
in
think
there.
that could be helpful when you read it all
Yeah.
together. I'm not suggesting that there couldn't possibly be any mitigating factors, but just given what's on here, it felt very black and white to read it that way.
Right, sometimes the difficulty is trying to resolve a case as efficiently as possible and not having to litigate every single detail. And sometimes some of the negotiation is wordsmithing the findings of fact, but I think I get your point entirely, is that this might be helpful, so when other people look at this, they go, okay, but a number 6 says, because of these mitigating circumstances, the sanction has been reduced or something to that effect.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that
Okay.
could be helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you're saying that would go on the agreed order or?
We could list it in the finding of fact, it just,
Okay.
we couldn't do it in this one, but I mean,
Sure,
for future
right.
orders, we
Okay.
could do something like that, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other discussion of this agenda item? Okay, then we will move on to agenda item number 10, report of cases dismissed by the council's executive director. Is there any discussion of agenda item number 10? Okay, then let's move on to agenda item number 11. Status report of quarterly enforcement case activities. Any discussion of these?
I just have a question. I noticed that there was a huge jump in complaints reviewed at ISC just over the last couple of quarters. I mean, we've got a 9 and a 14 and then a 48. And I just want to say, wow, that's a lot of time for the staff to prepare all of the investigative reports and get those scheduled and get those held. And so thank you that we're moving that many through.
Yeah.
That's big. And I'm curious, when it says FY 2024 under pending cases by fiscal year, we're already at 135 for this fiscal year? But that fiscal year did not start January 1, right?
September 1.
Oh, I was fixing to say, wowza.
Okay.
Okay.
I had to look at that too. I was
Yeah.
like, how can we be that high already?
Okay,
Anyways,
got
And it's all 4 points.
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Okie dokie, then we're on to, agenda item number 12. We have the report from the committee chairs. So we will begin with Dr. Elder.
Okay, so the Ethics Committee has had several meetings since our last full board meeting in September. November 9th, we met and we had informal settlement conferences for 4 cases, 2 of which resulted in probated suspensions. One was a dismissal, not enough evidence, and the other was a warning letter. Then we met again January 8th as a follow-up discussion for 1 case to say, we had made a decision in November that actually couldn't be executed when we looked further into it. And so we ended up in January 8th meeting dismissing with a warning letter. And then we had a January 9th meeting where the Ethics Committee met and we just reviewed cases that had already come through. It's kind of sometimes what happens is the board, the staff adjudicates and it never makes it to an ISC. So we as a board don't really hear the details. So just for our ability to say, yes, we're aware of what's happening as the board members who sit on the Ethics Committee, we go back and review cases that have been adjudicated through. And as we adjudicated 3 different cases that day, we all were in agreement with the decisions that had been made, whether they had gone through ISC or by staff. And at this point, I don't think we have another Ethics Committee meeting set yet, but I'm certain we'll have some soon. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, then we'll move on to agenda item number B, report from the Licensing Standards Committee Chair. That would be me. So the Licensing Standards Committee in and of itself, we did not meet, but there were some things that were handled. One, we had an applicant who was short 0.3 ethics hours. This person had been licensed in another jurisdiction for like 10 years, and then they took a sabbatical and they moved to another state and they got licensed in that state. They were only licensed there for 6 months, and then they came to Texas. And so we couldn't use the 2-year rule to just grant them their license. So we had to go back and look at their academics, and their program was on quarter hours. And so they had 2.6 hours of ethics. And so we ended up rounding up for that person so that their hours would count. And then we're gonna have another discussion about that here in a minute. I also approved 3 study plans. We've also had some ongoing deliberation with an associate who applied for an upgrade that submitted incorrect information on her application. And we've been trying to go back and forth to get some information from her. And anyway, so there's been some stuff with that too. And then Sarah has been working on an AMFT supervisor candidate research project. I'm just trying to look to see if there's an increased risk of violations for people who were approved as an double AMFT approved supervisor candidate compared to other licensees. And so you're about 20% completed that project. So that's kind of what the Licensing Standards Committee has been up to. So then any questions about that? Okay. Then we will move on to the report from the Outreach Committee Chair. That is also me. We've just had 2 things. We met for the lunch hour webinar on October 27th, and I think that went really well. I don't know, I think it went really well. Good conversation. It's always good to just be able to like talk to our constituents and the public and other licensees, and I don't know, it's just always good. So I really enjoyed that. It was who else? There was me, Ms. Smith.
I did.
Dr. Elder,
Mr. Parrish.
Mr. Parrish. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, so the 4 of us did that.
Do we have any analytics on how many people we had in attendance and how long they stayed?
I neglected to get that for you, but I'll.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you waving?
I'm just laughing.
You're just laughing at Sarah's neglect?
And
I'll get that
then
for you.
Sure.
Dr. Elder presented at TCA in November on behalf of the board. How did that go?
I thought it went really well. The audience it was more people than I thought it
Yeah.
would be normally at a TCA conference. And they were engaged and asking questions. Many people
Excellent.
stayed after. And so I really felt good about it.
Mhm.
I missed you, Russ. Join me next time.
We'll do it.
It's in Dallas next
We'll do
year.
it.
So yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's easier.
Yeah, a lot easier.
Houston drive was a beating. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm sure. Okay, any other questions or any other discussion about the Outreach Committee? Okay, then we'll move on to D, report from the Professional Development Committee Chair. That is also me. I don't normally chair 3 things, but that's just the way that it's worked out right now. Anyway, so the Professional Development Committee, we met in December to discuss CEs, which we're going to talk about below. We made some changes to the JP exam, And we recommended some minor changes to the supervisory agreement form, just for clarity, and to help associates realize that they can file a complaint against their supervisor, and that they can also change supervisors. That is also something that will be discussed later. So anyways, but those are the things
I
that
have
need.
some questions about that.
Yeah.
Is that Okay, okay. So, I noticed the change on the supervisor agreement form. Completely agree with that. I think it's important to empower our associates to
Yeah.
understand their rights. I actually have a question on the bullet point that's right above the change section. It says, I understand the supervisory arrangement must be reflected on all billing documents, but when I went back and looked at what it says in our rules, it actually doesn't say all billing documents. It says all practice-related forms, including intake and billing documents. Can we amend? Because this makes it sound like as long as I have it on my billing documents, I don't have to have it on my informed consent. I don't have to have it anywhere else. And I think we require it everywhere. So I'm wondering if we just change that wording where it would say on all practice-related forms, including intake and billing documents, then it's clear to our associates that they don't just get to put it on a billing document and say, okay, I educated the public. Because the rules is, it's 801.43C2.
I'd be in favor of that. I think clarity is good. And I think if somebody is looking at this, that may give the impression that the only thing they are looking at is that it's reflected on billing documents. But it does need to show up on business cards,
Everywhere.
web pages, letterheads, any marketing materials, all of,
So if
all
we say
that
all
information.
practice-related documents, that might cover it, or we could say including, we could, I don't know, do y'all want to add the extra or just say all practice-related documents? That's kind of a catch-all.
Yeah, I'd like being consistent with the rule and saying on all practice-related documents. I'm sorry, were you gonna say something?
I don't, does it say all practice-related documents or forms? 80143C2. Just if we're going straight for what the wording is. C and 2, an LMFT associate must not represent themselves, blah, blah, blah. This disclosure must appear on all marketing materials, billing documents, and practice-related forms and documents. Okay, so if we just say practice-related forms,
maybe lift that whole phrase. Marketing, marketing, billing, practice related?
yeah, it says, appear on all marketing materials, billing documents, and practice-related forms and documents where the LMFT associate's name appears, including websites and intake documents. I don't know if I want to make it that wordy.
Yeah.
Not that, but
Where
just,
are you?
801.43C2.
So I notice a couple of bullets above on the form, it says must follow all laws and rules.
So you're saying it kind of fits in there?
So just for the board members' consideration, how much of the rules do we want to retype onto the form?
So then why do we have the separate bullet for, I understand the supervisory arrangement must be reflected on all billing documents if that also falls under there?
Couldn't answer that question. The
Yeah.
form was drafted a long time ago.
What if, just to simplify it, you just scratched out billing, and just said must be reflected on all documents, and just sort of left it like that. If you wanted to put a parenthetical, you could say marketing, billing, practice related after that, but if
I
you're,
like
if
just
you're,
on, yeah.
if you just delete billing, you could say must be reflected on all documents and just leave it at that, and you already have, you have to comply with all the rules, and the rules
Yeah.
are pretty specific.
Because you
That
said
way you're
change it
just
to
not
all-
making it longer and
Right,
longer.
right.
You said all practice-related.
Or you
I'm
could just
sorry.
say it must be reflected on all scratch out billing documents and then just all documents.
All documents.
And if you wanted to get more specific, you could put a parenthetical after it that said marketing, billing, practice related, but I'm looking to try to make it shorter. That was my goal.
Yeah.
Could you add just the rule number
Sure.
in parentheses and then they can look it up and it's. the
Yeah.
purpose there.
The 801
43C.
443, yeah. C2.
I mean, would it be too long to just say on all marketing, billing, and practice documents?
I'm okay with it being on all documents, and I like adding referral to the rule. I don't know.
As long as we never just change it, the rule never changes.
Oh, that's a good point. Then we have to change this document every time we renumber anything.
Here's the thing, if we leave it like that, with getting rid of the word billing, so we're not highlighting billing only.
Right.
This is the type of thing that is gone over with the supervisor anyway. The supervisor is gonna be going over the Ps and Qs with their associate anyway.
Okay.
And hopefully a supervisor will emphasize webpage, billing documents, business cards. This is what it needs to do, going through the rule and the statute. I would expect that a supervisor who does that is a supervisor in good standing, and a supervisor who doesn't do that will wreak the havoc of the winds of doom and gloom.
So what are you suggesting we should change it to?
Just scratch the word billing
Okay, just leave it as on all documents.
on all documents, and then leave that to part of the supervisory relationship to clarify that as the associate evolves.
Agreed.
Agreed.
What do we need to do to make that happen?
I don't think we have to make a motion. I think we just have to ask staff to do it, and then staff is, like, this document actually then belongs to BHEC, so BHEC is the one who has to then decide whether they're really gonna make that change or not. So we can suggest to staff that they make this change.
So I am so instructed
Yes, you are so instructed
to
remove the
change it
word
to
billing,
on all docs.
yeah, just on all documents.
And then I will forward that to Executive Director Spinks for review by the council.
Any other discussion about any other discussion about this agenda item? Yes?
Okay, so I noticed under the recommended changes to MFTJP exam, it was remove all question and answer sets that had anything to do with BHEC except for those 3 that are listed there. I absolutely trust the Professional Development Committee. I know we've continually gotten feedback from licensees. There's just too many questions about BHEC. How were these particular questions?
Picked.
Yeah, just out of curiosity.
Well, this is somewhat of a 2-step process. I went through all of the questions and I picked ones that I thought that we should get rid of, ones we should keep, and ones that I didn't feel strongly about one way or the other. And then, kind of embarrassing to say, but I accidentally slept through the meeting the committee met.
Oh, yes, I do.
You showed up at the end.
I showed up at the end.
Yeah, you did.
Anyways, I was just really tired.
It was a day.
It was a day.
It was a day.
Anywho, so they actually addressed this, the committee discussed then, so I don't know how they decided. I think they kept some of my recommendations, they did not keep some of my other recommendations. So,
Was this decision made in response to this consistent feedback
Yes.
we get? Okay,
yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks, that's all.
And the rationale behind that was BHEC has been around sufficient time for people to have, in other words, a new generation has come in that has been educated with BHEC much more than it wasn't when BHEC was first rolled out. And so there was an emphasis on BHEC rules, what BHEC does, the relationship that we have with BHEC, and that was never addressed until now,
Makes
to kind of
sense.
pare it down.
Yeah. Okay. I think our licensees will be happy.
I hope so.
I hear smiles. I hear smiles.
Okay, any other questions about the report from the Professional Development Committee? Okay, then we will move on to E, report from the Rules Committee. Dr.
Yes,
Martine.
yes, and I would like for Dr. Elder to just go ahead and do this one.
Oh, my
Oh,
gosh.
not Dr. Metcalf, to
Mhm.
go ahead, since you were on a roll with all of these.
Oh,
Why
no.
don't you just take this one? We did meet in November and we met in January, and some of the topics we talked about, and feel free to chime in, was the use of artificial intelligence. And in the industry and the place of that, so Dr. Merchant has been with, on the front end of that. Do you have any comments on?
I can give kind of an update, or maybe Dr. Elder could, but I did reach out, because one of the things I was supposed to do was to reach out to AMFTRB and ask them about artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
And so I did reach out to Lois, and she said that the AMFTRB board is going to be forming an AI committee, like a subcommittee to kind of address and look at, what kind of are there regulations that are in need, around AI? And so, yeah, but I mean, they just formed the committee, like they just met in January, and so they just formed the committee, so they've not done any work. But AMFTRB is going to be forming a committee to look at AI.
And that would incorporate, if a therapist is going to be using AI, what's the informed consent look like
Right.
for that? So that the clients are aware that there are components of AI that are being utilized within the therapeutic process.
Mhm.
And that's all part of this bigger discussion and clarification.
Yeah.
Any other comments on that, Dr. Elder? Did you, on that part of it?
Oh, no.
And then that was kind of, okay, and in the January meeting, we were talking about supervisors, and we are gonna be getting into standardized hours. We're gonna be looking at that, I think that's item 14 on the agenda that we will be discussing a little bit more, but was there anything else that?
One other thing that had come up in the rules committee in November, that did not make it onto the board agenda, and that's my fault, because I'm doing anyways, that's my fault, it not being on here, but one of the things that came up in the rules committee was about the telehealth hour, telephone hours, telephone supervision, and possibly maybe eliminating the telephone rule. So currently you can only do 50 hours of supervision via telephone. This came up in our town hall meeting, where somebody noted that they do supervision in a lot of rural communities where broadband isn't stable, like internet's not stable, and so sometimes they will start with a Zoom session and then they end up having to switch to telephone because it doesn't work. Anyway, so she had asked the board to consider maybe either getting rid of the rule that caps it at 50 hours or increasing it to like 80, or you know what I mean, but like doing something with that rule. So anyway, so we discussed that in rules committee. And if I remember correctly from my notes, that we were going to maybe ask the board to look at that. But it did not make it onto the agenda, so I don't know that we can actually discuss it, but I will put that
So-
out there.
What's on the agenda is a report from the rules committee.
Okay.
So, but what we can't do is move forward with any
With any
rulemaking.
rulemaking,
That's
yeah.
correct.
What I had in, if I,
Yeah,
what
please.
I had in my notes was that the rules committee on November 7th determined to present to the full board options of leave as is at a 50-hour maximum by
Mhm.
telephone, remove it altogether, so all hours could be by telephone, or increase it to 80 hours by
Mm.
telephone.
Mhm.
And then the process was discussed was depending on the direction that the board members might give during a discussion today about the rules committee report, then Attorney Patrick would be able to prepare a draft rule
Perfect.
to present back to the rules committee to see what they
Yeah.
like about that rule or not, and whether they want to recommend it to go through rulemaking.
Well, good, then let's discuss.
So is that what we can discuss now, or does that need to be a separate line item for the next meeting?
Well, I think we
On
can,
the
dis-
agenda.
we can
It's-
discuss it now. And then we
It's
can
part
give-
of the rules committee's report.
Okay.
Is but I'll defer to the
Yes.
attorneys.
Yeah, we wouldn't be formally proposing it. We would just be discussing the ideas to then go to a committee to then bring back a proposal for the next board
For
meeting.
the next meeting?
To then send to the council for. a
Formally
proposal.
look at it.
Yeah.
So now we can chat
Yeah.
about it. We can brainstorm about it. So are there thoughts? Because those three options, leave it as is, which is 50 hours, bump it up to 80 hours, or remove the restriction altogether.
Well, so just to give some context, particularly for our new public members,
Thank you.
there's a requirement of 200 hours of supervision to become fully licensed as an MFT. So 100 of that can come from your pre-graduate hours, like during your graduate program. A lot of people do bring some of those hours from their graduate program, but then you have to have a total of 200, half of which can be group and half of which have to be individual. We had talked about it before, and the reasoning behind the 50-hour limit was this is a different kind of supervision than my eyes are on you and I can see your body language and how you're reacting to this conversation about this client. So that's kind of the context around it. And so we had said a quarter of those hours, which is 50, could be just phone. And now there's some, I mean, obviously we have supervisors, boots on the ground doing the work, and they're hitting some roadblocks about that. So we need to kind of discuss. Any other questions about context? Is that helpful?
So any comments on this? Any preferences?
So I just looked up a map of broadband availability coverage in Texas, and I'm actually surprised to see that there's some decent areas where I'm looking at like Goliad, Texas, for example, that has 0% access to 25 megabits per second. So I think for those of us that maybe practice in less rural areas, this seems like an arbitrary or maybe even outdated rule. But just looking at some of these numbers, I think that it sounds like it's necessary to, at minimum, keep the current rule in place and potentially discuss expanding the amount of time that you could do it via telephone.
Okay, so do you mean reducing the number of hours? Or do you mean like getting rid of the number of hours, or do you still want there to be a limit?
This is hard for me because my feeling is that you really do lose a lot of the nonverbal when you eliminate the eyeballs on the human. As a supervisor, I think I get a lot of really important nonverbal data, being able to see my associates. But I definitely feel way more open after looking at this map. I feel way more open to keeping the rule at the very minimum, keeping the rule as is.
I think that I agree. I mean, I don't like doing anything over the telephone, to be honest. So I do think that there is something that is gained by being able to actually lay eyes on your supervisee. But I also think that supervisors, I mean, the supervisee, like they can be sanctioned, for what their supervisee is doing. And so I would imagine, I just feel like a lot of supervisors, even if they have the option of doing all of their hours via telephone, that they would still probably opt not to do that, just because it's their license. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there are also some that would, maybe those who aren't necessarily practicing at the highest level, which I think is why I'm leery or wary about getting rid of the rule altogether or making it completely open. But I think especially when there's inclement weather, when you live far away from your supervisor, having it at least as a backup seems to make sense.
What about the idea of, if it's been at 50 hours and there are some comments about that, bumping it up to 80 for a while, let's see what that does. And if that fits the bill, because they're looking at a total of 100 that they would have to get and post-grad. So out of those 100 hours, there's up to 80 hours that could be by telephone, especially in these rural areas, or if there's internet connectivity issues or whatever it may be with that, and see if that fits the bill, meets the need, rather than just getting rid of any restriction, because I could see that one of the things that's interesting is all supervision used to be face-to-face in your office. Okay, and then here comes COVID, and so we had to shift to doing teletherapy or telesupervision with that, and we addressed any kind of restrictions with video supervision, and there is no limit on the video supervision. So you could either do it in the office or video or 50 hours of phone. And I think utilizing technology in a good way is good without removing the restriction completely, but limiting the telephone because of what's been said about the eye to eye. So maybe if we consider, I'd be in favor of, and I know we're not voting on it, but I'd be in favor of bumping it up to 80 to accommodate any kind of misgivings that there may be or grumblings that there may be about it being just 50. See if the 80 would accommodate that, and if so, then we had a really good rhythm with that.
I'm in agreement with that. My thought about, my initial thought was, why don't we just go to 100? Let's just say half of it can be by phone. But the problem with that in my mind is, if you bring 100 pre-graduate hours, that means all of your associate
Right.
supervision can be by phone with no eyes. And I have a problem with that.
Right.
So, I mean, I really think we need to preserve that visual as much as possible, while also, I think, offering some flexibility for the technology limitations. I think 80 is a good, it feels good to me. And I know we don't use the word feel because we're
Yeah.
supposed to be data-based, but
Yeah, and the idea of when we really stepped into the domain of telesupervision, it expanded the geographic reach of supervision to being the entire state, whereas it used to be limited to that geographic region that you would be limited to go into that office and have that face to face. And I think this would be another accommodation of that reach capability that is gonna take into account technological snags. Now, the big problem we're gonna have, well, not the big problem, if you're doing, if you've got internet problems and you're on a VoIP phone, well, you've got internet problems on the VoIP phone. So you'd be limited to using cell phone, which that would have to be dealt with, but never mind. I'm just saying that internet is the bane of our existence.
Well, and if we're trying to help people get their certification and finish their supervision hours, and you've got areas that are rural, I mean, it's hard for them sometimes to get from point A to point. Sometimes the distance is huge when you think about West Texas, and you know what I mean? So I think it would be good if we proposed 80, or, I mean, I would be in favor of that as well.
so then can we send it to be drafted, and then that go, did that mean the draft would need to go to the rules committee would then need to send it back to the full board sends it to BHEC?
Yeah, hearing all this, I can put something together for the next rules committee to look at, and then next board meeting.
Okay, because it seems like the general sense is we're not gonna do away with it. I mean, we're not gonna lift the restriction. There is gonna be a restriction.
I would actually be in favor of just getting rid of the restriction and just letting them do all hours via telephone if they wanted to. But just because, one, I don't know that supervisors are gonna take that option anyways. But also, like, I guess I'm just not sure that, like, what difference is that 20 hours of visual, what difference is that 20 hours going to make? You know what I mean? Like, if we were to up it to 80, and now they do 80 of them via telephone, and they do 20, you know, where they can actually lay eyes on them, like, what difference is that 20 going to make?
I see it as a hybrid approach to supervision, where I allow you to be completely online, doing your own thing. We check in by phone, but it's like every now and then we're gonna be in the same room together, even if it's just virtually. I mean, let's talk our feeling of like, oh my gosh, we're all together. This feels so
Yeah.
nice. I get to be with you. I think it's the same thing. And if I'm gonna sign off on somebody's work, or if I'm gonna have a supervisor who we license sign off on someone's work, I want them to have that. So good to see you
Yeah.
with
I mean,
them.
I guess I trust the supervisor to trigger, I just wanna trust the supervisor to be able to make that
Sure.
decision on their own, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, I guess there probably are some like Weasley supervisors out there who would
What?
just be
No,
like.
no.
Yeah.
Those are
Yeah.
in other disciplines
You know,
that
who talk to
should not be
their,
named.
yeah, I don't
Um,
know, but I guess, I don't know. I
The
just wanna
one,
trust
the one thing I
supervisor.
like about keeping it maybe at an 80-20 is if it's totally lifted, then you don't have to think about how you're gonna be doing supervision at any point in time.
Yeah.
It's all gonna be on phone, just pick up the phone, make it, do it on that. If it's an 80-20, it's gonna cause the supervisor to stop and think, wait, I can't go past a certain number, which means I'm requiring a minimal standard of actually having to do face to face. And that stopping and thinking part, I think, removes it being too laissez-faire, too assuming of that.
For the board's consideration, I do get a couple of inquiries a month about the associate reports that the supervisor told me X and I don't want to do it that way. Do I have to? So if you have the rule that says no more than 80, you're trusting
Backing
the
that.
supervisor, but you're also supporting the supervisor. just for that consideration. This has been somewhat unusual in the last year or so, where I had associates offer that their supervisor said X, and that they're still questioning it when their supervisor said it. So that's, I don't know if that's a what I don't know what to call it, millennial type of thing, or a stereotype type of thing, or if it's they've not been taught the rules yet, and they're not trusting their supervisor to tell them what the rules are yet.
Do the other boards have a limit?
For telephone? No, not that I'm aware of.
Do the other boards allow telephone?
Yeah, I know, like for psychology, there's not a limit. I don't think that there's, well, actually now let me double check that. But before I answer your question, if I can, so we're not voting or finalizing it
Right.
right now. And so what I might suggest is, why don't we put in multiple options in the draft? And so so we can only publish one version of it whenever it finally goes up, but we're in a pre stage at this point. So what I would suggest is, why not kind of list all the different, choose your own adventure as we can go, and then the rules committee can look at it and bring as many of the options back to the full board the next time, and then they can vote on that. So I would say, why all of these ideas, why don't we just kind of put them into for consideration in the future, instead of saying, let's just not go with that one, I guess, at this point.
The social work board allows via audio, web technology, or other electronic supervision techniques. So
There's no
audio
limit.
sounds like,
Telephone, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no limit.
nope,
No restriction on that.
no minimum or maximum.
Are you looking at psychology?
And I'm looking up
LPC.
LPC?
professional counselors, yeah.
I don't know. I'm all about embracing technology, but I think you can just go too far.
So technically, telephone is an old technology.
It is an old technology, I know.
Did we allow telephone, like, have we always allowed telephone supervision, or is that just something we've allowed recently when we started allowing telesupervision?
We always, there was never a restriction until it was put in. I wasn't even on the board when it was put in. I was the liaison watching it
Okay.
happen. But yeah, it wasn't addressed at all
Okay,
until that limit was put in.
okay.
Yeah, psychology, I think it actually has a 50% for electronic means, but you can exceed the 50% if it's for synchronous audiovisual means.
Okay.
So
So
they're
still
face to
telephone.
face 50%?
Well, that would include Zoom, so you could Zoom 100%
Oh,
because it's synchronous audio visual,
But still telephone would be,
up to
There's no
50%.
visual.
Yeah, there's no visual.
What I find in professional counselors, in the section about experience requirements, is it talks about individual or group, and only 50% by group, but it doesn't mention whether it's in person or face to screen to person, or what, or telephone. Unless they tucked it someplace else that I don't know where it is.
Okay, so rules committee will take this up
yeah.
before the next board
Draft.
meeting, and we'll have that as a agenda item for our next board meeting in April to make a decision on that. Good.
We also-
I think outside of what we're gonna be discussing later, that's all the rules committee.
I think one other thing that came up in the rules committee, because I had a note here to follow up on this, was about IPV screening. Like, this had come up in the AMFTRB meeting about screening for
Interpersonal
intimate partner violence, yeah. And then we discussed at the rules meeting, the rules committee. And I think what we had decided was that it really isn't the board's place to like issue guidance on when to screen for intimate partner violence or child, or like, well, mostly intimate partner violence. And that's really should fall to like TAMFT or like a professional association. But that it was my understanding then that AMFTRB might be actually putting together some guidance. And so I did reach out to Lois with AMFTRB, and she confirmed that yes, they were putting together some IPV screening But again, they've like just started looking at it, so there's no guidance yet. They've not made any progress on it, but AMFTRB is going to be putting together hopefully some guidance around screening for domestic violence.
And something else from the Rules Committee meeting on January 12th of this year was that we discussed the whole roundup, which I know is later, rounding up hours, which is
Oh, yeah.
later on the agenda. But there was something we discussed that we said, let's bring this back and talk about it, which was changing the wording in our rules from requiring like our academic requirements. Instead of saying 3 semester hours in this, which makes it hard to calculate when someone's on a quarter system, just saying courses in this area and not specifying how many semester hours or quarter hours were required, like coursework in this area is required.
Yeah.
And kind of removing the specifics, because then that takes the onus off the staff to have to calculate. So I don't really know, were we gonna move forward with that? Or are we gonna kind of let that lie?
So what I have in my notes is that Mr. Spear and Attorney Patrick would be working on language to then present back to the rule committee
Oh,
at
okay,
some future
so that's
date.
already in the works then.
That's my understanding. It may be part of the 4-year review,
Did you know
This-
that's on your agenda?
because that's pretty,
Definitely.
that's pretty much a large thing, and then
Yeah.
we'll see where does it mesh with other
Yes.
parts.
Okay.
So that I believe we left that with Mr. Spear and Attorney Patrick to tackle the draft and bring it back to the rules committee.
Thank
Would it go
you.
back to the rules committee or to the licensing standards committee?
I'm thinking the rules committee,
Okay,
but I can see an argument for either one.
well, we'll see who's beating. We'll figure it out. Yeah,
We can arm wrestle.
we can, yeah. Okay, any other discussion from the rules committee? Report?
No.
Okay, then let's move on to agenda item number 13, requirements for continuing education. I'm just gonna briefly give you all the history of this and then I will open it up for discussion. So the idea of adding a 1-hour continuing education for crisis management was actually first proposed by Chaplain Stodlin. And he actually proposed this after the mass shooting at Fort Hood. And at that time, the standardization committee was working on CEs, and so we decided to table the conversation until after we, until after the standardization committee came, finished their meeting. And then we had the Uvalde shooting, and so it came up again after the Uvalde shooting, but this time it came up from higher up. There's actually a bill on, there's actually a bill presented this legislative session that would have required all professionals to do some sort of CE, but it, like most bills, nothing happened. So we are now again considering it because the legislature didn't make any move. We are now looking at it again. So this rule would require 1 hour of CE of a crisis CE every 2 years. And we have decided that CE would include things such as not just mass shootings, but suicide prevention, recognizing signs of deterioration, safety issues, domestic violence, child abuse, natural disaster, just any kind of area of crisis. So there have been arguments both for and against. Some of the arguments for is just that this is essential information that MFTs need to know, that some of this information changes over time. I know that from the time that whenever I was trained at MFT, they just said, get a piece of paper from your client that says they're not going to kill themselves, and that's all you really need to do. Anyways, we've come a long way. There are also, the recommendations on domestic violence have changed in 20 years. Just so much of this stuff, it changes. Anyways, so one, it would just help MFTs stay kind of up to date with, latest recommendations and things like that. This is also, we're talking about life and death in most of these things, so it's a pretty, it's serious. We have had, it's rare, and this is one of the arguments against, but it is rare for us to have complaints in front of the ethics board for things such as, suicide or domestic violence or things like that. But when I can remember one of my very first board meetings that I attended as a member of the public, just as a professional, so I was on the board, involved a case where somebody committed suicide and therapist was under investigation because she didn't do a safety plan, or, you know, I know we've had at least a couple of those cases. So it does, even though it's rare, it does come up. So those are some of the arguments for. The arguments against is that it might feel like micromanaging. And then again, that these complaints are rare. So anyway, so these are just, that's kind of some of the background, some of the history. I'll open it up for discussion or questions or whatever y'all would like to do.
Who would provide the continuing education in this area?
Just the people who continue to provide it now. We have a whole like big long list of all the different types of people who can be CE providers. So hospitals, universities, private practitioners, like supervisors, attorneys, like there's a big long list of people who can provide CEs. So I will say, well, I do have a question, I think probably for either Brian or Patrick. Or Sarah. One of my concerns is that there's just so many already like hours that are required, you know what I mean? And so I'm like, oh my gosh, one more, not one more. But like, I guess one of the things I'd ask Sarah, and so I'm gonna ask you guys now, is like, if I am a supervisor and I take a class in supervision, like telehealth, like telesupervision, why can't that count for both supervision and my TAS credit?
When you say supervision, are you talking about the supervisor? I would think it's, so under here, you have to do the 6 hours of continuing education as a supervisor.
Right.
And and do you have the requirement for if you're gonna do telesupervision, right? Or
Right.
Telepractice. But what it sounds like what you're wanting to do is use one credit for two different purposes. And so we would typically, I think, look for this credit you're using for that purpose, this credit you're using for this other purpose. So it would be individually for those types of things, like the human trafficking course, right? Like somebody will oftentimes say, well, I had a 2-hour course. Well, we can only give you an hour because
Right.
I mean, most people can get it done in an hour and it's
Right.
statutorily required
Right.
course, but we would count it for that. I mean,
Right.
that's just, we
Right.
count it for that 1 hour, so.
But if I take a supervision course, if I get, 6 hours of supervision CEs, and one of those hours is over telesupervision, so it's both, it's TAS and it's supervision, why can I not count it for both?
So staff gets a certificate,
Right,
and it has your name on it, it has the date,
yeah,
it has how many credit hours, and it has the title.
right,
So staff is gleaning from that certificate, what category should I put that in?
Yeah.
And so if it's supervision and technology assisted services,
well, if it's in
Staff would-
telesupervision,
so what staff has is the title.
yeah,
They don't have 1 hour was this and another, they don't have a synopsis, they don't have an
Right.
agenda, they don't
Yeah.
have a syllabus for that course.
Yeah.
And if they did, I would recommend that we not ask staff to look through a syllabus and count up this
No.
15 minutes goes to that.
well, I don't think it would be
So-
15 minutes for this and 15 minutes for that, I think it would be, it's telesupervision, which is both TAS and supervision, so why can't it count for both?
Can you double dip?
Okay, so let's walk down that road.
Okay,
It's 4 hours total,
okay,
telehealth and supervision. So if I count 4 hours for the supervision and 4 hours for the telehealth,
mhm.
and I get to the 30, now I've counted those 4 hours twice.
Well, they'd still only count
So
for 4
that's
hours.
8 hours.
It would only count for 4. I mean, it'd still only count for 4 hours. It would just be,
I don't know how to teach staff that math. Of you count these 4 hours here and you count them here, but you don't count them you don't count one of those 4 in the total.
I think it would just be like checking boxes. I don't know. I
Uh,
guess,
I don't think that they currently, I think I understand what you're saying is you still have the total 30, so you need to count up 30, but you're still using that certificate for two separate purposes, right? You're doing it to fulfill this requirement and this
the
requirement,
two
right?
categories.
The two categories, right? And I think traditionally, and again, I don't necessarily process the CE, so,
Mhm.
but I think what they do is they look for, I have a certificate to fill up this category.
Yeah.
And then I have another certificate to fill up this category. I don't think that they typically would take one certificate and then count it here and then count it in the second one. They'll look for either that or a certificate that shows you did a 10-hour course that day and, 5 of them were in this subject area, and 5 of them were in this other subject area. So you could use it that way, but to me, I think we've always looked at it as the double dipping, right? You're using it for one thing for two purposes. And we I think traditionally looked at it as
How open is staff to looking at it differently?
I mean, it could be an internal conversation with staff that actually does it on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we could report back and figure out more on that. As we sit here right now, I don't think that's the standard
I
procedure.
don't think it is either, but to me, it makes sense that if something is, I just don't understand if it fits in 2 categories, why we can't count it for both categories.
Well, I mean, along that line of thinking, right now, the way that we have our CEs, if you're a supervisor, everyone has 30 hours completely. Our 6 hours of supervision can fit within that 30. So when you add up an hour of human trafficking, 2 hours of telehealth, 6 hours of supervision, 1 hour of crisis management, 3 hours cultural development, diversity, and 6 hours of ethics, 19 out of your 30 hours are dictated by the
Your
board.
supervisor, yeah.
But if we add the double dip option, it can open up more of the 30 to be my choice of the topic of interest.
Yeah,
So I think it counters the licensee's complaint, like you're micromanaging my CEs, and kind of gives them more options,
Yeah.
while also still meeting all of the areas that we see as essential for getting CEs in, if we could go that route.
because then you could take, especially for supervisors, if you took supervision ethics and TAS and I don't know, it just seems like it would free them up to be able to take CEs that are more in line with what they want to do if they could count both.
I don't know if Tim knows more about how they do the CE counting, but I think I think they don't double dip.
No, I don't think they do either. That's why that's why I'm just curious if we can, I don't know, I like the idea of y'all maybe having a conversation and just seeing if that's even a possibility.
Yeah, well, would it be worth holding this proposal and finding out more information before we move forward on it, or?
I don't know. I don't know.
I think it's interesting, but I don't know that it is relevant to the fact that, do we think a 1 CE of crisis management is essential?
Necessary, yeah.
Especially since the definition of crisis management is fairly broad.
Yeah.
I think, for example, if you're in a professional organization like I'm in EMDRIA, right? If they included a portion on, suicidal ideation, which would be very easy in
Yeah.
any sort of trauma treatment,
Mhm.
that would knock out that requirement for me. So I don't know that adding this rule is tantamount to micromanaging for me.
For your consideration, when you first asked, I did forward that to Mr. Spear, but I haven't followed up with him yet.
So then is this discussion to decide as a board whether we approve this?
Yes. Yeah, the
So,
rule, yeah.
Yeah,
Good. If we approve it, it'll go up to BHAC and they'll do their process and then we'll open up for public comment and I'll be interested to hear the public comment as well.
are other boards, other BHEC member boards adopting this requirement?
The social work board looked at it and they asked to do a survey about crisis intervention. And we did a survey that came back with social workers have such a varied, there are those that provide therapy and there are those that are non-clinical. They do not provide therapy, they provide other social work services. So what crisis intervention meant, what those words meant, depended very largely on what setting the social worker was working in. Crisis intervention in a hospice setting might mean helping care for the family or deal with someone's crisis as they present themselves to you or that kind of thing. Versus just a myriad of things and longer than the list that you've listed here, just depending on the setting. They decided not to move forward with it because of those very great varied responses. So at this time, it's not being moved forward with social work. I saw Attorney Patrick shaking his head, so
Yeah, no, I was,
LPC
I
has
was-
not and psychology has not.
Is that because they have considered and said no, or because they haven't considered?
I don't think the other, I mean, social work considered it and they didn't move forward with it. I can't recall psychology or LPC considering this change, trying to remember now.
I do listen to all the meetings, but it doesn't come to mind that they have considered it or had a discussion about it, but I hesitate to have you rely on my faulty memory.
Well, I mean, given the fact that the standardization committee has worked very hard to standardize CE requirements, it gives me, I really think this is important, but at the same time, it gives me pause. I don't want to complicate things for staff, but more importantly, for licensees who hold multiple licenses. The whole purpose of the standardization committee was to make that seamless. And if we throw this in the mix, we're making it not as seamless.
Sometimes it's already not seamless.
Oh, it's
Or
not?
there's already inconsistencies.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Do they also require the cultural diversity CEs?
they do.
That we-
Yes,
Okay.
but not the technology services.
Ah, that's right. Well, I mean, I make a motion that we approve this and let's see what public comment we get. We can always consider if we get some significant public comment and
Exactly, yeah.
Just before we vote, I'm just wondering, is there a cost consideration to this or not?
I don't think it would increase the cost because they're gonna keep that CE no matter what. We're not increasing the total number.
Okay, it's
So-
included.
Yeah. Okay, do I have a second? Mr. Pierce seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adding a crisis CE, raise their hand. Okay, that is unanimous. Okie dokie. Next item on the agenda. Discussion and possible action, considering recommendations from the Rules Committee regarding our supervisor requirements. So this is to set equitable requirements for supervisor status and to standardize provisions concerning the automatic revocation of a supervisor status after a disciplinary action. So what, I guess let me give you all a history of this one also. So ever since I have been on the board, which is since 2019, we have been concerned about, the way the rule is written now, if somebody is an LMFT or a WMFT approved supervisor candidate, so WMFT is like the professional organization, they have created like a supervisory training that people can go through. And if you are a candidate, it means that you have taken a course and that you are under supervision of another WMFT approved supervisor. Anyways, we have been concerned about our rule that allows WMFT approved supervisor candidates to become LMFTSs, because what this rule allows is like, if I were an associate and I were to get upgrade to being a fully licensed therapist today, under this rule, I can apply to become a supervisor tomorrow, you know? And so the other rule, how it also, typically to become an LMFT supervisor, you have to be licensed for, is it 3 years?
3 years.
in 3,000 hours.
And 3,000 hours. So this would basically, normally we have this like little window of time, you have to be an independent practice before you can become a supervisor. This rule allows people to basically go from being an associate to being a supervisor in a very, you know, there's no waiting period. Does that make sense? So we have explored different ways of trying to do something to address this. So we've gotten, when we've tried to address this before, there's been pushback from WMFT, there's been pushback. Also, if we were to change the rule, it could be perceived as being anti-competitive, because now we are making it harder for people to become a supervisor, right? So we have to consider the anti-competitiveness of our rule changes. However, one of the things that we realized, and I don't know who was brilliant in coming up
This
with
guy right
this.
here.
Yeah, yes, but basically this rule change would create equity between people who go the traditional route, which is getting the 3,000 hours, by requiring that, yes, you can still become a supervisor by becoming an double EMFT approved supervisor candidate, but you still have to wait the 3,000 hours, you still be licensed for 3 years, like, just to make sure that people still have that buffer. Does that make sense? Do you want to add anything?
No, I thought you did a good job with it. I also just reconfigured it because I felt, sorry if it looks weird, but I wanted to reconfigure it so it kind of flowed a little easier, I think, so.
I like what you did.
And I like it because it keeps the 3-year, 3,000 hours,
Right.
which is crucial. And it
Okay.
removes the shortcut that if you're an AMFT approved supervisor court, it removes that shortcut. But it does produce parity that you could either have a graduate course, you could have the 40-hour course, or you could have the AAMFT approved supervisor course.
Yeah.
And if you've had any one of those, then you do the 3 years, 3,000. I think that removes that shortcut that was inadvertently, that's a loophole that was put in there.
Well, it also still allows candidates to be able, because one of the problems is that if you become a candidate, but you're not a supervisor, where are you gonna actually do your supervision? And so this way candidates can still do their supervision, they're still under getting soup of soup. I don't know, yeah, so I really like this fix.
What percentage of supervisors went that route, the shortcutted route?
I don't know that we don't have great data on that, or maybe even any data, but we do know that it's, like, I know at least 2 people who have gone that route.
2 out of how many supervisors? are we at?
Anecdotally, I could say that it's a small percentage, but I couldn't give you a precise number. At one time, how the person qualified for supervisor status
Track it,
wasn't data that
collect it.
we kept. We kept their application, we sent it off to the library and for records and,
Yeah.
but so it's not in our database, it's not something I can slice and dice through. We've recently been adding that information as an attachment, so I can look at their actual application. So that's why I'm 20% through that project, because I'm having to look at attachments that are 200 pages long to find the page I'm looking for.
Okay,
And this proposal is not to address anything that's egregious.
right.
It's designed to make things consistent and to streamline and to make it that the pathways you have are very clear and that there aren't any potential shortcuts.
I think it also probably does a better job of lining us up with the other boards as well. I don't think there's a shortcut with the LBCs. I don't think there's a shortcut with other disciplines.
Correct. Yeah, because the AAMFT approved supervisor status course with all of that is something that's unique to MFTs. Which is also interesting because there are some graduate programs that will admit to a MFT graduate school program someone who is licensed as an LPC or licensed as a CSW. And if they take the approved supervisor course, there can be some confusion that because they've taken the AAMFT, they can now supervise MFTs, which they can't. They just get credit for the course. They can't do anything with it other than get the course credit.
Well, and I know our school psychologists, because that's my background, is education, they had to have so many years before they could supervise, just like our speech therapists do too. So I think it's in line with what most other professions are doing too. Educators, you have to have, before you can be an administrator, you have to have X number of years of classroom experience, so.
Any other discussion? Or do I have a motion? Motion to approve? Okay, do I have a second? Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of, well, I'm sorry, did we want to take these together? Or can I take them, is it okay if we take them separately?
I would prefer separately because one's not a rule change.
Okay, cool. Okay, then if you agree that we should make this rule change to make the requirements more equitable, then please approve by raising your hand. I will get this out eventually
Yeah.
somehow. Yeah. Okay,
As
that's unanimous.
proposed.
As proposed, yes. Okay, also in there was also a rule change, not a, I guess it's a rule change.
It's an instruction to staff.
Okay. An instruction to staff regarding graduate hours. I'm sorry, but what about the other part of 801.143
Yeah.
concerning the revocation?
D,
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about that part.
Do we need to vote on that separately?
Yeah.
Okay.
So essentially the second half of A, which is concerning the automatic revocation of a supervisor status after a disciplinary order. Do you want to talk about where this comes from, Patrick?
It's directly plagiarized from the LPC rules where there's a, there's,
copy and paste.
yes, and changed LMFT from LPC to LMFT. Under their rules, if you get a board order and it's a reprimand, it's not an automatic revocation of supervisor status. Now, that being said, they can still revoke supervisor status for a reprimand. They just aren't required to by rule. So what this would do is, let's just say you have a very lower level violation. Somebody made a goof, didn't respond to a records request within 15 days. It took them 90 days. They had some great excuse, whatever, but still a violation. You want to give them a reprimand. They would lose their supervisor status under LMFT, under this rule. And so what this would do is give flexibility, say, okay, we can reprimand you, we can discipline you, but we don't have to automatically do it. So it gives the flexibility for lower level discipline, which is what LPC has. But anything more severe that requires a probated suspension, or obviously revocation, you would lose your supervisor status. So that's where that came from. It's one to sort of align with some of the other boards, but it's also to give flexibility in imposing discipline on certain people, because that sometimes is a big issue with, trying to negotiate cases is supervisor status, and especially if this would just, again, be for lower level reprimands, cases that aren't, don't necessitate a more severe discipline.
What I like about it is that we still, as a board, if we're serving on the ISC panel and we say, you know what, I know this is a lower level reprimand, but I still think we need to revoke based on what we're seeing. We still have the ability to do that. We can take their supervisory status, but we don't have to by rule anymore. And I like that flexibility.
Any additional discussion? Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of making this change, raise your hands. None opposed, so that is unanimous also. Okay, next is B, where we are, again, this would be a direction to staff or instruction to staff. This goes back to what I was talking about earlier about maybe being able to round 2.5 graduate semester hours to 3 graduate hours. Is there any discussion on this?
Anything we can do to make it happier, easier, more clear.
Yeah, I think the point of bringing this up is just, it would be something where I know it went to the applications committee where somebody they did quarter-hour semesters, they had a 2.6 or 2.7 or something. And we're saying, can we just, round this up to the 3 and give it to them? So it would streamline it where we wouldn't have to keep taking it to an applications committee. And the other part of it is, I don't think Brian wants to have to go to SOA and argue about a 0.3 hours
Exactly.
and to have the judge deny an application over that. So it's really just hey, if we want to make sure we're doing it in accordance with your guys' wishes. So we wanted to bring it to your attention, and kind of get feedback and hear, no, that's horrible, don't do it, or, no, round up from 0.5 is okay.
Feel free to round.
Any opposition to rounding? Okay, then staff is hereby instructed to round up. Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
discussion, okay, moving on to agenda item number 15. Discussion and possible action regarding public comment on proposed changes. So essentially what we're doing here is we're going to go through each of these rules. We will read any public comment, which I think only one of them actually had comment. And then we have choices. So we can choose to adopt the rule as it is written, Or we can choose to make changes to the rule, if we decide to based on public comment. And then if we approve the rule, it goes back to BHEC for their final approval before going to the governor's office, just so y'all know the process here. Okay, so the first one is 801.2 definitions. This is to add a definition of independent practice. This originally came as a request from staff, just so that there's clarity around what independent practice means. Any discussion of this? There were no comments. There are no public comments.
I move that we approve.
I will second.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that is unanimous. 801.48, record keeping confidentiality and release of records. To clarify that any licensees in private practice must establish a plan of custody control for client records. And so I was rereading something. There was also no public comment on that. Was this for private practice or just for supervisees? Oh, no, it was
It's
private practice.
private practice,
We
Okay.
did another one for
We did another one for
supervisors.
supervisors. Okay, that's what I was
because they
thinking.
may be hired
Yeah,
and the agency
yeah.
would have it.
Again, there was no public comment. Is there any comment or questions now? Would somebody like to make a motion to approve?
To approve.
Okay. Okay. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that is unanimous. 801.142, this is supervised clinical experience requirements. We used to, basically, currently, we only allow 500 hours of the experience that an associate has to get. Only 500 of those hours can be via technology assisted services. The other 1,500 hours of direct service, I'm sorry, the other 1,000 hours have to be in person, like face to face. We have gotten lots of pushback on this. Currently, there's a rule that would allow, the rule itself doesn't allow, but it does allow staff to, when there's been some sort of declared governor emergency, such as the pandemic, that staff can waive certain requirements. And so staff has been waiving, to my knowledge, waiving this 500-hour rule, at least to some extent. Is that correct?
On a case by case basis.
It's on a case by case basis. Anyways, this rule change here would increase this 500 hours to 750 hours, which basically just means that half of their direct experience can be done via TAS instead of having to be in person. We received one public comment regarding 801.142, and it was in support of making the change. So I'm really surprised we didn't get like a mass of comments, you know, in support of that.
It's
So,
about time.
yeah. Anyways. Any questions or comments or discussion over 801.142?
I move that we approve.
Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay. I guess that also approved, that was unanimous. Okay, so moving on to 801.143, supervision requirements. This is to remove the limit, the 12 supervising limit on supervisors, and allow supervisors to make that determination on their own. This actually came also out of a town hall at TAMFT. No other licensing boards have a supervising limit. And so anyways, and there were no comments on this rule either. So is there any questions, comments, discussion?
This one also adds the plan of custody for supervisory records.
Here's the custody.
Well,
part.
Okay,
F.3 is one
And
and then
here's the.
D.5.
okay. And then this one also adds the supervisors are, have to have a chain of
Change
custody.
of custody records.
Yeah, records.
Can you explain the custody or control of the records? It's like, where else would they be? Like, I mean,
Like if they were to
secure?
die, yeah, like if they were to die or become incapacitated in some way, like where are the records gonna go? Who's gonna care for them or receive them? We have to do it for our clients, and this would require supervisors to also do it for their supervision records. I mean, we have had cases where a supervisor has died and there's no record of supervision hours. And so that's been problematic.
So it's basically saying like in your informed consent with the supervisee, you have to say, here is who will access my records and give you the ability to get your hours up to this point so they can get their license. Without that spelled out in the records, the supervisee goes, well, how do I get my records?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of to protect the
Yes,
supervisee.
yes.
And we already have the keeper of records clause as professional. And this expands the keeper of records to include the supervision record, not just clinical records.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Would somebody like to make a motion?
Are we
I
gonna
will.
move on both of them?
think can we move on both of them? Any objections to moving on both of them?
Are you talking about 305 as well?
No, just 801.143 all
Yeah, for the
together.
whole rule, correct.
For the
Yeah,
whole
you
rule.
can do both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Elvira.
I move on both.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, then we have 801.305, which is just some changes to our schedule of sanctions, which is just basically to correct some typographical errors and things like that. So there was also no comment regarding that. So any questions or comments about this one?
That does need to be approved. That's it.
Yes, please.
Okay,
Would somebody like to make a
Um,
motion?
I'll make a motion. We approve it.
Okay, we got a second, Mr. Pirish. Okay, all those who are in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that is unanimous. Okey dokey, then, moving on to number 16, discussion and possible action regarding the jurisprudence exam. Is there any discussion for this? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I always love to read the comments in the quarterly summary. And one of the things I noticed is that someone said, I don't think this should be required for renewal. So just because we're on record right now, and hopefully the public is listening, it's not required for renewal of a license unless you're a supervisor.
Right.
So it's required for supervisors, it's required if you're applying for a provisional license. If it's your initial application, you have to do it, but it's not required for renewals. So just to clarify that.
I'm curious, one comment was that it took almost 5 hours to complete. That's not typical, is it?
No.
No,
Okay, I don't
I
think
would
so.
assume not.
no. In fact, are we able to log that? Do we get that, capture that data?
The vendors tells me that they're not, that they don't, or they're not able to track start time and end time and calculate in between. And the user can, doesn't have to complete the exam in one sitting.
Oh.
So
That's
the
why.
user can come and go and,
Okay.
and I had one that had their exam open for a number of months and the vendor,
Oh my gosh.
the vendor asked, is this like good anymore? Or, I mean, can they go back and complete it? And in the meantime, we changed the questions. So I was like.
Drop that license. We don't even do
Sorry.
that anymore.
So I was like, I think she needs to start
Start
again
over.
with the current
Oh,
questions.
Maybe she was just testing us to see if we were paying attention.
Maybe she got a new computer in the meantime.
Yeah, I was gonna
or
say, it's
something
probably in the
crashed, or
trash.
I don't know, I don't know what happened. So there are, that's the only one I've heard of in the MFT group. There was one other in the social work group that had a strange anomaly like that, so it happens, but it's rare. And yours is a 65 question in each exam. It pulls from a general pool and it pulls random questions for each examinee. And then there are some that are based on frequent violations or frequent application deficiencies that are mandatory, so every exam gets a smattering of those. Social work, in contrast, has 125 questions.
Wow.
And so, and both get comments about this takes too long, or this is just right, or it's not long enough. So
Can't please everybody.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I'm really happy with this feedback. I feel like, well, one, seems like it's shorter than normal. And two, it just seems mostly positive. So, yeah. Okay, any other questions, comments, discussion, about agenda item number 16?
No, I just like the way that the jurisprudence exam is what, coming of age, it's maturing nicely
Yeah.
and into a really good rhythm and a pattern
Mhm.
that I think what we're offering and the feedback that we're getting is much more in sync and harmony. And I just think we're doing a good job in that regard. So we're gonna pat you on the back.
Well, that's not all me for
Yeah,
my.
it is. No, it's all you.
No, it's not. The Professional Development Committee has spent a lot of time working on this even before I was on it, and they've done a really good job. Sarah, I think, is the one who wrote most of probably 90% of all the questions, really. We've gone back and edited some of them, but it's taken a lot of work to get our jurisprudence exam in a good place. We've removed double negatives. We've done a lot of work on it as a team, so it's been really good. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, agenda, okay, do we need a break or do y'all just want to kind of power through? Power through, okay. Okay, so we are moving on then to agenda item number, I think we're on 17. Yes, 17, report from the board chair. Okay, so as I already have announced, we have lost one of our other beloved board members. Anthony has moved on to San Francisco, and we wish him the best. Also, this week I met with Dan Logston with Department of Defense about an MFT compact. The MFT or the DoD is accepting applications to help set up an MFT or just to set up compacts in general, you know what I mean? He does think the DoD would be very interested in working with MFT simply because so many military members they have spouses that are MFTs, and because they utilize the services of MFTs, that the DoD, I think, probably would be very interested in helping us. Usually an agency completes the application, which in our case would either be AAMFT or AMFTRB. However, it is my understanding that neither one of those agencies is interested in hosting a compact. Both of them, it seems to be, again, this is my understanding, and so they might say differently, but my understanding is that both AAMFT and AMFTRB would rather work through legislative means towards endorsement, like an endorsement model, as opposed to doing some sort of compact. And so I don't remember the exact name of the program. I meant to look it up and I forgot, but I know that AAMFT has recently started, I think it's called like Impact or something.
Access MFT initiative.
MFT, thank you. Where they are basically partnering they're targeting particular states, depending on what is their legislative season, to try to do lobbying within individual states to work towards an endorsement model or just increasing mobility in that way, as opposed to going through a compact. Anyways, and I think AMFTRB is probably, I mean, they also do, I think they would prefer an endorsement model rather than a compact. So anyway, so there is still a third option if neither AAMFT or AMFTRB wanted to sponsor a compact. It would be possible for some states to get together and apply together. I don't know if there's any other states would even be interested in a compact. Dan did give me a list of other states that were at a meeting that they held in December. However, the application is due next week. I don't think we're going to make it in time. But even if it wasn't due next week, he seemed to indicate that there could be some flexibility. However, we'd still have to have it. They want their next board chosen by, or their next profession chosen by like the summer. And I just don't think that we could even throw something together in line for the summer. There would also just be extraordinary costs that somebody would have to pay for that. You know what I mean? And if AMFT and AMFTRB aren't willing to do it, like I assume probably falls to the states. Anyways, all this to say, I just don't know that this is the right path forward. I don't know. Anyways, that was my conversation. If y'all have any questions or comments, I will happily try to answer them. I just wanted to give y'all an FYI that I had that conversation with.
So when you say states get together, that would be at the legislative level, states getting together?
Well,
Because I don't know that the board has statutory authority to enter into a compact.
It does not. It would basically to fill out the application, just to fill out the application to the DoD for an MFT compact. A group of states, like 5 or 6 states, could get together and fill out the application together to apply for an MFT compact. not to actually join it, like not, just to fill out the application for DOD to consider which profession they're going to choose next to help fund, the startup costs of the compact. Does that make sense?
So they're generating interest.
Yeah.
DOD is looking for who's really interested in this, and then they will give first looks to those people. And that's what this application.
Yeah, so basically
be.
like, it could be MFT applies, it could be cosmetologist apply, it could be, what's another, auctioneers, all three would maybe apply to the DOD, and basically what they're applying for is funds to help with the setup costs of a compact. And then DOD would help with things such as like the cost of the database, which they said is like $500,000, like they would cover the cost of that. But then whoever did the applying would then also would have to cover the other costs that are above and beyond, to fill, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's why nobody's gonna apply.
Yeah,
Yeah, no state wants to be liable for that tab.
yeah. I mean, I didn't ever get quite a very clear answer on if there's not an agency who's paying for it. Like, I don't know, anyways. So, anyways, I just wanted to basically just give y'all an FYI that I'd had that
Thank you for
conversation.
representing us in that conversation.
Good.
You're welcome.
And are there other pathways
I mean,
that might?
there are other pathways. So the endorsement model would basically be kind of like what we already have, where we say if somebody's been licensed in another jurisdiction for 2 years, like then we consider their academic and experience requirements met, and we can just grant them a license.
With the requirements of examination also
Yes.
being,
Yeah,
and criminal history.
and all those other
But
things. Yeah.
it streamlines it somewhat, but
Yeah.
not a stamp.
No stamp, yes. The problem with that kind of model is that it helps people coming into our state, but it doesn't help our MFTs going to other states, which I think is where like WMFT comes in, because I think their goal is to basically try to lobby with a bunch of different states to help a bunch of different states adopt this endorsement model so that it's easier to come in everywhere. Does that make sense? A third pathway is to do reciprocity agreements. So like we would maybe enter into a reciprocity agreement with like New Mexico and Oklahoma and Louisiana and Arkansas because they're nearby, and this way licensees could cross, lines who live kind of in those border towns. But we don't have the power to enter into a reciprocity agreement. That takes a legislative action also. And so, I just don't, that would only help people kind of on the border of our state. It wouldn't necessarily help people, again, coming from California or other, faraway places, or help us going to states that are far away either. So anyways,
The military families that get
yeah,
stationed someplace in Virginia.
yeah, exactly.
Well, and I'll say it's unfortunate for MFTs from my perspective as an educator, hearing students have these conversations. What I'm hearing is, well, I'll just get my LPC. I'm not going to go for the LMFT because LPC's got this compact thing coming. It means I can practice in more states. I can just do it without my LMFT. And so I think I'm worried we'll start to see declining numbers unless we move on this, make something happen. And that's why I'm glad that AMFTRB is somehow looking at this kind of initiative to see, and perhaps Texas could be a part of that initiative in the
We'd like
future
to be, I
moving
think,
forward.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's another thing that Lois mentioned, was that AMFTRB has also formed a mobility committee to kind of look at, increasing mobility across state lines, or, going from one state to another. Okay, any questions about any of this? Okay, the next thing I have to let y'all know about is I did do new committee assignments. I try to keep the assignments as stable as possible, so there'd be a good integration of both new members and tenured members, on each committee. I did go ahead and appoint myself as chair of the Rules Committee. Sorry, Russ.
I mean, oh, drat.
And the main reason I did
No, that's
that,
good.
well, the main reason I did that is because the Rules Committee, I believe, is going to be the committee that is handling the 4-year rule review. And it dawned on me the other day, dawned on me yesterday as I was putting together these committee assignments, that up until 4 months ago, like I was like a mid-tenured person, you know what I mean? Like there was people who'd been here, you know, longer than me and people who'd been here shorter than me. And now I'm like the most tenured person on the board. Like I've been here now longer than everybody. And so, anywho, and so I'm also the only one who has, I think, been through a 4-year rule review. I don't think anybody else has been through a 4-year rule review yet. And so therefore I thought maybe it'd be better for me to just go ahead and chair the rules committee so that I can, anyways, just because we will be taking on that 4-year rule review.
Lead
Anyways,
on,
yeah.
we're behind you.
But as soon as that review is over, Russ, back to you.
I'll be well rested.
Anywho, okay, so that's any questions about the assignments or anything? I guess also just as a rundown. Sorry, as a rundown of our assignments, as just a rundown of our committees. We just kind of run through them and tell you what they are, just so that y'all are aware for our new members. So the Licensing Standards Committee, basically they set the rules of regarding like licensing standards, like how many hours do you have to do? Like what are the academic requirements? What are the experience requirements? You know, they set the standards for getting a license in Texas. And then we have the Professional Development Committee. And the Professional Development Committee handles like continuing education, the jurisprudence exam, like kind of things that you need to do to like develop as a professional to kind of maintain your license. And then we have the Ethics Committee, and they handle ethical complaints. And they do the licensing standards, or they do the ISC, what does that stand for again?
Informal settlement.
Informal settlement conferences. They do the ISCs. What else? What's our fourth committee? Oh, and then we have the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee, I mean, they just handle rules broadly, but they specifically look at like the rules for professional practice, you know. So like that 801.43 especially is where they do a lot of work. And then the Outreach Committee, we are basically just handling outreach to both the public and to licensees, just trying to engage licensees in the practice, or just trying to engage licensees in the governance of their license. So those are just some of the committees. And yeah, any questions about that?
If I could add, the licensing committee also will look at any appeals when someone someone's application is denied by staff. But there might be a possibility that the board might have a different opinion, then it might go to the Rules Committee. There's a rule that steps through it. It goes to the licensing manager, then the executive director, then the committee, and then the full board, and then the council, as seen fit by the council. It's not driven by the applicant. It's staff that's saying this needs to be looked at more closely.
The Licensing Standards Committee also approves study plans. So if somebody has failed the exam more than 3 times, then they have to submit a study plan. And so the chair of that will approve those usually. So, okay. And I think that's it. I don't think I have anything else. We do have TAMFT coming up. Russ and I will be presenting at TAMFT on behalf of the board. Sarah's also going to get to go, which I'm really excited about. Yeah, it's in April. It's in April. So any questions about my report? Okay, then let's keep going. Number 18, report to the board, from the board's delegates to BHEC. Oh, actually, neither one of them are here.
So I would draw your attention to the summary that was in your packet.
I do have a question. So I just want to make sure that I am understanding that rule change correctly, that basically a person in Texas does not need a Texas license to practice if the client is in another jurisdiction and they are following the rules of that jurisdiction.
What rule is that?
Maybe I misread it.
No, I just don't know which one you're at.
Hang on, let me find it.
82.23.
Thank you.
It's in the summary, it's under B. I'll bring it up just a second. So the rule reads, a person is engaged in the practice of marriage and family therapy within this state if any of the criteria set out in chapter 502 of the occupations code occurs while the client is located in this state. So
And then it
I'll
goes,
defer to Attorney Patrick, but yes, I believe that your interpretation was.
then if you go down to F, it
That's correct.
says, you know, if somebody provides a mental health service that is within the scope of the license through the use of a telehealth service to a client who's located outside of the state, such conduct does not constitute the practice of marriage and family therapy. Okay, so that my interpretation of that's correct.
The short answer is yes, yeah. your
Can you
interpretation
repeat?
is
I
correct.
didn't
Yeah, what was your
understand.
interpretation?
So basically, hang on, I wrote it down so I can remember it. Basically, if a person is in Texas.
Right.
And they are practicing what would normally be considered marriage and family therapy.
The therapist,
Uh-huh,
okay.
but they're not licensed in Texas. And their client is in another jurisdiction, as long as they are following the rules of that jurisdiction, what they're doing in Texas does not count as marriage and family therapy. They don't need a Texas license to do it. So if
Whereas previously, if the therapist,
or the client,
if say a non-Texas license holder, say I have a license from Missouri. And I happen to be in Texas, but my client's in Missouri. But because I'm physically in Texas, I would have to have a Texas license to give services
right?
to that person in Missouri and likely have to have a Missouri license as well.
Correct.
So this is easing a burden somewhat on the non-Texas license holders, because I'm not aware of a jurisdiction that doesn't require.
Outside the United States, it does.
A
There's no,
license.
there's no lots of
It could-
places,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it could be.
But yeah, so like if I had a client in Washington and I was in Texas and I wasn't licensed here, then I could do, as long as I had a Washington license, I could see that client.
So basically, if therapists go on vacation, they can do therapy from their vacation location with their clients back home, and it's not considered
Correct.
being,
Right. But,
Yeah.
or they could move here. They could move here and live here,
oh, I didn't think about that.
you know? But again, like you think about like military spouses, it could be a
Yeah.
military spouse moves and
Yeah.
she just moves her private
The
practice.
client is who we're trying to protect.
Yeah,
And so if it's not a Texas client, we don't have
Okay.
jurisdiction to protect them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the examples that this came up with was a bunch of social workers because of storms in Louisiana came to Texas, escaping those storms. They
yeah.
wanted to keep providing services to the people, to their clients in
In
Louisiana.
yeah.
And we're basically saying, nope, you don't have a Texas license. And
Right.
So there's obviously, you know, you can look at both sides of it, but what was debated and what was discussed is how are we gonna define it? Is it gonna be defined as where's the client and who, and is that who we're protecting, or are we also, as previously, the law doesn't necessarily specifically state it's, you know, just the client or just where the provider is located. And so that's where this came in. There's a lot of conflicts that you get stuck with too, if you look at like California, that's a Terrasoft state,
Mhm.
Texas is not.
Right.
And so if you have conflicting standards and you are now bound to be licensed in both and comply with both, you can't.
Yeah.
So
So-
there's obviously there's a lot of issues with that, but the short of it is, I mean, that's sort of also like SIPAC is the psychology interjurisdictional compact. And that's the model that it follows, is it looks to, you have to follow the rules and where the client is.
So okay, so when we had kind of addressed this before, I thought there was a statute that actually said you had to be licensed. Like I thought that.
In Texas, no, the statute is there in the rule, and it's that 113.002. And it essentially says you're not prohibited from providing services to, like, we can't prohibit you from providing services to a client in another state, but you may be subject to the jurisdiction or regulations of that other state.
Are you talking about the rule or the statute?
I'm talking about that statute. I thought you were saying there's some rule that says.
No,
you
I thought
can't do that.
I thought there was a statute that basically, like, I thought one of the reasons why we couldn't fix this 2 years ago was because there was a statute that said you had to have a license to practice in Texas.
Well, that's why we're looking to see what are we defining as what is the practice, and so
Okay.
that's why there isn't a
This is a
definition.
workaround.
There isn't a statute that I know of
Okay.
that this would violate or that says if you're physically here, it just says this is what the practice is. And so we're defining what is the practice. Is it where the client is being where the services are being delivered to the client, or is it where the provider is physically located, right? And so, because and that's what this rule is essentially answering that
I
question.
agree with the rule, like I said, I thought there was a statute that was preventing us from enacting something like this before.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any particular statute that this would violate,
Okay,
so I don't.
So what about so do we still need our temporary license? I guess we probably still do in case a client is in Texas,
Right,
they'd still be able to use our temporary license to see the
Right.
client.
or they came here to provide testimony in a court,
Well, this
or
would cover that, right?
if you're testifying in a Texas courthouse, like I think you're providing services, because usually that's the client is here, right? I mean, you're,
The court's jurisdiction would be on a client
Yeah,
that's in
okay.
Texas as
Yeah.
opposed to a client that's in Virginia, if that's a Texas court, right?
right. And that's what it kind of tries to get into in the definition here about client, and it's, if you're hired by a court or something like that, it talks about the different sorts of, you're giving it to an individual, to a group, the services to an entity like a state or a federal court, those sorts of things, so.
And just to clarify for the public that's listening, this is a proposed rule. Public comment ended on December 17th, and the council will look at this rule on February 20th. So it is not yet an effective rule. It's merely a proposed rule at this time.
Okay, any other discussion about this rule or any of the other proposed rules? I was happy to see the update on degree on a license. I was happy to see that one in there. Okay, anything else? Yes.
I have a question here because we did read this report about the cost of licensing mental health professionals. And it brought up a question that I have about where we at with the potential for having a CE database where licensees can go in and enter their CEs, and that way it's tracked, and therefore there is some accountability to the board for all licensees about that.
I think there was discussion about looking at CE broker or some other vendor like that, and so I think it's being explored. I don't know.
Moving forward or not?
Yeah, I don't know where it is in that process yet, but I think it's something that they're looking at.
Still in the exploratory phase.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I wonder if CE broker would allow licensees to pick which category it goes in, and if they would allow it to pick 2 categories. Or even 3, I don't know.
Probably not.
Yeah, I think and again, it's not necessarily just CE broker, but they may look at CE broker and other competing vendors or something like that. So you
Yeah.
never know. They may have all kinds of options for that sort of stuff.
Yeah, anyways, okay.
Chair Merchant, I know Jenny has got it with the set it up for bid. So they're working on all that right now.
Thank you.
So are you there or are you here?
I'm here, in my office.
No, Mr. Spear.
No, it's Brenda talking.
Oh, I know, but I'm just saying Mr. Spear's on the, like, he has a screen on like, it has his name on the
Yeah.
Also
screen.
sitting in the audience, Brenda.
Oh, okay. He just decided
Sorry.
to see you guys.
He's everywhere. Anyways.
Well, bravo on this
In
list of
underwear.
accomplishments. by
I
you guys. I mean,
know,
it is just
yes,
amazing what has
yes.
happened in a very extremely short period of time.
Is it on the website? Maybe we should put that on the
I
website.
know, right?
Like,
Bravo.
yeah. Okay, any other discussion over agenda item number 18? Okay, then we'll move on to agenda item number 19. Sarah.
So I included in your packet materials, the fiscal year 24 first quarter performance measurements, performance measures. Those are just for your information. They'll be presented to the council on February 20th. So you got a little bit of a sneak peek just because of the timing. You've got some in your materials, information about a court case in which a military spouse was denied a Texas Education Agency teacher certificate type of thing. And Daryl wanted you to read that so you'd be aware of some parallels that were, anyway, that things we might need to, I think we've already addressed, but just so you're aware of them, and it's something we don't wanna move forward into, we just wanna be aware of that, that's kind of the curve we wanna avoid. To all the people listening, for all applicants and licensees, just want to repeat that when you're expecting an email reply from staff, from our staff, please check your spam and your junk folders. Oftentimes, the government email gets filtered by the recipient's Outlook or by the recipient's email application into their junk or spam folders, and then you don't think we've responded. Also, if you've left a voice message for us, much of our staff work remotely most of the time, so we often respond by email to those phone calls. So even if you're not expecting an email, but you're expecting a return call, please check your junk and spam folders because staff may have responded to you by email. Sometimes what you think is a simple question, the answer is a bit more complicated, and being able to quote rules to you in an email rather than read them to you over the phone is a little more clarifying. I wanted to give you a little tour of our website. I don't have it up. And those of you that have been to the Zoom meetings before have probably seen this before. But relatively new is the proposed rule and rule changes, rulemaking process. Quick link on the right-hand side of the screen, it's the second bullet down. If you click on that link, it describes the rule process. And all describes the notification of rulemaking in the Texas Register. And then at the bottom, it'll list the council meeting where rules have been discussed. And if you click on that link, it opens up a PDF that gives you what was discussed at a particular meeting. So, and a link to where you can submit a public comment specifically for that section of the rules. So on February 20th or shortly after, the council will meet on February 20th. Shortly after that, there'll be another PDF here with links for you to make your public comment there. Scrolling back up to the top of the page, wanted to bring to your attention, I'm going to click on the main view again. And in the right-hand side, quick links wanted to bring to your attention are how-to user guides. Almost any function that you need staff's help to do, there's an online transaction that you can likely perform to get that function done. So for example, if you need to update your address, or if you need to order a duplicate certificate, or even how to look up past rules, there's a how-to guide for that. So use those, and maybe you won't have to wait for staff to reply to an email or reply to a voicemail. Those have been very helpful. And, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't want to stop that. Going back up to the top of the page, so I get back to our homepage by clicking on the Executive Council. Wanted to show you the statutes and rules webpage where we have our consolidated rule books. So we've got a rule book for each of the 4 member boards. And the most recent one was updated November 20th. That's since the last MFT board meeting. So if you download the rule book, because it's an easily searchable PDF of the rules, you may have an older copy saved on your device. So if your copy doesn't say November 20th, then please download the new one so you're searching the more recent rules. You can't get out of it. I'll have to do that again. Sorry, the Zoom was covering my navigation. Okay, going back to the home page, so you get the quick links again. I encourage everyone to sign up for email updates. That's directly to your inbox. You fill out this subscription form and then click submit at the bottom, and you'll get an email asking you to confirm the subscription. It gives you updates on when the meetings are, updates of significant operational changes, updates on rule changes. So that's a good way to keep informed about what's going on with the board. That concludes my report, unless there's any questions or any information you'd like to have. Dr. Eldred.
So last time we met, there was some discussion on seeing if we could get any analytics about the website, how many hits, what areas get the most hits, that kind of thing. And I'm just curious if there was anything available.
WordPress doesn't help us in that. So we don't have that for you.
And meaning it's not available, it's just not there. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments about agenda item number 19? Okay, then we'll move on to agenda item number 20, discussion of possible actions regarding future priorities and activities of the board. Essentially, this is a place if y'all had something that you wanted the board to look at a future meeting or in a committee, this would be a place where you could suggest that. So is there anything anybody would like to suggest for item number 20? Okay, then we will move on to public comment.
Just to go over the housekeeping, those members who wish to give public comment, there's no one but Mr. Spear in the gallery here in person. If you're attending by computer, please use the use hand feature in Zoom. 3 minutes for each comment. We ask that you not ask about a particular application or make comment about a particular complaint. The board members don't have that information in front of them. Public comment is meant to be a way for the board to hear from the public, but not necessarily to engage in a discussion or a question and answer session with the public. After we hear from everyone who has joined by computer, then if anyone has joined by phone, I will ask that caller to unmute. *6 will unmute the phone and then ask them if they have public comment. So without further ado, at this time, I don't see anyone with a raised hand in our attendees. Yes, I do. So Philip Crum, do you have public comment?
Well, I do. I'm Philip Crum, co-founder of AMP, an alternative association for mental health practitioners, and I've been listening. It's not clear at all to me what scenario your definition of crisis management is aimed at. I'm not sure which problem you're trying to fix. There's at least 3: the initial on-site Black Swan crisis response, the Uvaldes, the ongoing post-initial crisis management response care, the aftercare, or number 3, the in-office one-on-one crisis prevention situations. In fact, it looks like your definition's aimed at all 3 of them and possibly any other scenario that might come up. Now, since this entire discussion seems to have originated with the Fort Hood Uvalde incidents, I'm going to aim my comments that follow at the initial on-site Black Swan crisis scenario, and I would like to politely suggest that the other 2 scenarios be handled individually as well, rather than in a watered-down version of the definition of crisis management, which is not likely to accomplish any desired objective. Now, I've been listening to the various boards talk for the last year about how they need to do something to improve the mental health response element for what amounts to Black Swan events like Uvalde. I'd like to make a positive contribution to the discussion. I do have 3 questions that I wish every board member on all 4 boards would ask themselves before ever getting to a vote on more regulation. In fact, the first one's, it's easy because I'm going to pose, it's already a required BHEC rule in all 4 rule books. Number 1, is there a problem in need of a board-generated solution, and what is it? Do you have any empirical numbers-based proof that this problem exists, and may I see that proof? And this can all be found in the BHEC rules, 881.21 in various clauses there. If you can't prove there's a problem, and that rules out opinions, by the way, then the process needs to stop right there. This step, this required BHEC rule, is largely ignored by all 4 boards in my experience, and someone at the council level needs to put a stop to that practice. But for the sake of the argument, let's just say that there is a real problem here that can be proven, and that leads you as a board directly to a fork in the road question that I've not heard you consider, and that would be, Is this a problem better handled by the private sector or by more state regulation? Is there a private sector solution already in place? If there is, let's quantify it. Is it adequate for handling the problem? And if not, what's the probability of the private sector producing an adequate solution in an acceptable time frame? Has anybody on the board asked that question? And number 3 is, if there is a private sector solution in place and its infrastructure and resources are adequate for dealing with the positive problem, then why do we need more government regulation? I would love to hear some discussion on those very legitimate questions, and I appreciate you listening.
Thank you, sir. Carlos Perez, you have public comment?
Hi, yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your work on all of these matters. I have 2 quick things on behalf of TAMFT. Dr. Merchant mentioned the conference coming up. This is a big conference. This is 50 years worth of conference that we're celebrating. We're going to have some pretty good events, some really good speakers, and some special things for the membership at large. So early bird registration closes next week, if I'm not mistaken. So if you are planning to attend, that registration is available for us only through next week, the early bird registration. Second thing I want to mention on behalf of TAMFT, we are also in conversation with Access, Double MFT Access, and their efforts in license portability. Those conversations are in the very early stages, but I do want to say that TAMFT will update you all as the board and membership at large with any conversation, with any updates and any progression those conversations might have. But that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. And Zoom user, you have public comment. Would you state your name and if you are affiliated within an organization?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Kathleen Mills. I'm the co-founder of the Association for Mental Health Professionals.org. I'm a licensed professional counselor supervisor, certified employee assistance professional, and a certified integrative mental health professional. And I've been doing EAP work for the past 30 years, including CISD events, similar to Uvalde. I think you just acknowledged your CE requirements are overregulated. Now you think double dipping would be okay? 1-to-1 ratio equals 30 hours in my mind. But let's take Philip's question number 2, asked if a private sector solution already is in place, and the answer is yes, there is. Most counties, school districts, and many medium to large corporations have an EAP program in place that offers 6 to 10 hour certification programs in crisis management for Black Swan events, cruise line disasters, airplane crashes, Uvalde, and any other trauma-related occurrences. Those EAP programs pay their trained counselors very well for time and travel to participate in Black Swan events, as opposed to a pro bono group of self-dispatched volunteers that take up hotel rooms and other local resources that fully trained responders could be using. The EAPs typically have enough resources throughout their network for larger events and would be able to marshal and stage those resources for appropriate geographic area. We know that trauma has increased as a direct result of the past 4 years. Does this mean the state needs to mandate a 1-hour EMDR training? Thousands of our clients are suffering from vaccine-related injuries. Do we now need to require a 1-hour CE in autoimmune disorders? We know that over 17 million people worldwide have perished since 2020 as a direct result of the vaccines, not COVID, the vaccines. Those are documented, peer-reviewed numbers. Does this mean counselors should be required to take a 1-hour grief recovery CE? There are enough counselors who have freely elected to opt in for crisis training offered through EAP programs. What we need is a better utilization of those trained personnel. We don't need to regulate more training. 1 CE hour will not be effective for this type of response work anyways. That would be negligent on your part. What's needed is a way to manage existing private sector EAP resources on a state level for any episode that might occur. I'm going to suggest that what's needed to make more effective is better marketing to the EAPs, to their county and school districts as to what's available in the way of crisis team support dispatch. In other words, let's improve the communication between employees for the crisis management, not another regulated CE. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Mills. Diane Smedley, you have public comment?
Yes. Hello, Chair Dr. Merchant and fellow board members. My name is Dr. Diane Smedley. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed professional counselor. I appreciate the chance to talk today. I first want to thank Dr. Jody Elder for coming to the conference back in November at TCA and for her session going over board update from the LMFT board. We really, really appreciate that. As a dual licensed person, that really helps me out to be able to stay in contact with my LMFT side. Secondly, I also want to tell the board, I appreciate the fact that you all are trying to open up access to supervision, especially in those rural areas out in West Texas. I do hope you continue to balance access with quality supervision because both are incredibly important and neither outweighs the other. I appreciate the time to make a comment today, the opportunity to speak with you all, and the work that you do to continue to protect the citizens of the state of Texas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smedley. I see no other hands raised. And I see that no one is attending by telephone. So that concludes public comment.
Okay, then we are on to agenda item number 22, announcements and comments not requiring board action, such as statements regarding conferences and other recent or upcoming events. I think we've already mentioned the ones that are upcoming. BHAC meets on February 20th. Our next board meeting is going to be April 5th. And then TAMFT is April 11th through 13th. And those are the only dates that I know of between now and our next board meeting. So anybody else have anything they want to add for agenda item number 22? Okay, then that means that we are on to agenda item number 23, adjournment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
We want second. Yeah. Okay, then I have any further discussion? Okay, then all those in favor of adjourning, raise your hand, and we are adjourned at 3:23.
Thank you.